Hey, we're
Oh,
recording now.
oh, hey, Seth.
Hi, Brandon. It's nice to see you. Fancy seeing you here tonight.
So we've talked about that previously in previous episodes, previously on Intentionally Wes Anderson. We would have a gauntlet that one of us would do music. Um, I came up with a short bit that was on the guitar that was super easy, and then you came up on the short bit that was kind of super easy and on the banjo, both of which were amateur hour. And then I came up with a banger on piano, and you came up with a banger on synth. And then after that, it's just like I have no motivation to do it, and I also don't, and I don't think either one of us had the time either.
Right.
So I was thinking back to our college days when we lived together under the house of a realtor whose son would often come outside and pee naked. Um,
Man, I don't remember that. I just remember the rent was super cheap. I seriously swear it was 150 total and we split it so it was 75 each per month or something like that.
I thought it was 300, and we
Maybe
split
that
it.
was it. Maybe it was 150 each. Maybe that was the deal.
Yeah, there's still a Jello stain there marking our existence, or not Jello, but
Kool-Aid.
Kool-Aid stain,
Yeah.
which wasn't left by either one of us, oddly enough.
Yeah.
So let's see if we can say welcome to, or we could either say welcome to Intentionally Wes Anderson or Intentionally Wes Anderson and Building Triads.
Okay. All right. That'll work. Hold on just a second. I gotta. Okay. All right. So okay. So you'll give us the tonic, and I'll do the third, and then you'll flip to the fifth, then I'll flip to the flat seventh. Is that what we're doing?
Yeah.
Okay. I gotta tell you. Well, I'll tell you a story about that after we do this. All right. So
are we doing welcome to or intentionally?
I say let's stick with the theme of intentionally Wes Anderson. So you do that on the tonic, and then hold out that note so I can build the major third on top of that. Okay.
Okay. Intentionally.
Yeah, okay, don't pick a note that I'm like guessing. I'm like thinking, okay, it's going to be right around here, and then I'm trying to already get the third above that. Was that the highest note your voice can?
Oh man, that just seeing your response to that was so funny. All right. Intentionally. God damn, we haven't done this in a long time. Maybe we should let the iPhone ring be the theme.
Can you hear that in there?
All right.
So annoying. Intentionally. Okay. Wes Anderson.
Oh man, we haven't done this in such a long time. Let's give it one more chance and then we're out.
Okay.
And see if you can silence whatever's making noise.
Man, I don't know how to do that. It's so annoying. Hold on. Before we go this, I got to text my son, who is just 2 levels above me, like, cut that shit out. This is ridiculous. Hold on.
Intentionally. Wes Anderson. Yeah.
Yeah, that's okay. So while I'm doing this, let me tell you the story really briefly of me doing that. So Becoming the Archetype, who used to tour and do all that stuff as a heavy metal band, we used to stop in at this place in Ohio called Radio U, and we do these interviews in studio. Really cool sort of station that did TV music videos and radio station, like heavy music stuff. So we stop in, and they would always want us to do a jingle, and normally bands would come in like, "Hey, I'm so and so from this cool band. You should listen to Radio U," And we just thought, okay, that's lame. So we came in, and what we did is we would do this where we would build the major triad with the flat seventh, and then do the sort of like barbershop quartet thing to go down and come back up. So we practice. We had 4 of us. And we go radio, 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 and then we cut off you. And we always thought that was like hilarious, and so we recorded that, and they used that for a jingle for a couple years. For their thing.
So it actually came out good. Nobody messed it up.
Yeah, well, it's so brief. You're responsible for hitting one note and holding it, and then doing that, and then just waving down and back up. So we had rehearsed it in the van enough. that we did, and they thought they got a kick out of it. And I always remember, like, how proud I was. They're like, yes, we're a death metal band that can sing harmony. It's like a
Yeah.
barbershop quartet. So
Intentionally. All right, so let's see. Intentionally.
intentionally.
I think I messed mine up. It's really hard when you're not here in person.
Yeah, when you can't hear the other ones held out, I don't know that we can like build it without having the tonic.
Intentionally. No, I did hit mine. Intentionally. Just
intentionally.
Screw this. Wes Anderson. I can't get it. All right, so this week we're talking about fantastic
Mr.
Fox.
Yeah, fantastic Mr. Fox.
Actually, before we do that, I should say that you and I were once in a band together. Called Anchors, and we had a show where we thought it'd be funny to do a Picardy third every time we ended the song. Which, for people who don't know, a Picardy third is when you end in a minor key and change it to major on the last chord, or vice versa.
Yeah,
and we
not really vice versa, right?
I don't know.
Can it work the other way? I think it's only.
Be...
It's a medieval thing, and then the idea was you're always supposed to be in a major key. So when you play in minor, you've got to like rectify things at the end and give it a neat, nice bow on the end, so you make it major at the end. So you move that minor third to a major third, so it's nice and clean for the last chord.
Okay.
So
then just minor to major.
Yeah.
So we did it for 2 songs, and then by the 3rd song, no one in the audience was liking it. And I remember our drummer was like, stop.
It's funny because I mentioned this at church the other day, because the prelude that the organist was playing was in a minor key, and because it's we're Lutheran and that's all like based in like the 15 and 1600s, a lot of those ancient songs are by Bach and others are in that minor key, but then end with that Picardy third. So I told the congregation, I was like, I knew the prelude was done because I heard the Picardy third and I knew that was the final chord, so I knew it was time to start service. So
yeah,
no one knew what I was talking about.
It's named after a town, isn't it? Like it's named after a region or a town or something.
Probably, yeah.
Okay, so Fantastic Mr. Fox. We watched that this week. That was after coming back from watching 3 short films.
Yeah,
so,
right.
First of all, this is a big step because this is Wes Anderson's first stop motion animation. So it's a pretty big step. And he was originally supposed to work on it with an individual who he had worked with Life Aquatic, who was doing some stop motion stuff there.
Okay.
As far as the animals, but that guy actually went on to work with Coraline. So
okay.
This one also has a new distributor. I think this one's 20th Century Fox and Indian Paintbrush, and I think the previous ones were Touchstone Pictures, maybe. I know that's true for Royal Tenenbaums. I can't remember about Life Aquatic.
Man, I never pay attention to these things, so I have no idea. Like, do you think it makes a difference?
No, but let me tell you more facts. Also added on to this is a new composer, which is Alexandre Desplat, instead of Mark Mothersbaugh, who's been doing most of it.
Okay.
With not including Life Aquatic, or no, not including Darjeeling Limited, because that was mainly just Indian music. The score was just taking songs from another director's movies.
Okay.
And then Life Aquatic had very sparse music too. That was mainly just the Brazilian and Portugal or Portuguese David Bowie.
Yeah.
So
also the quirky, like, scene, atmosphere, mood music.
Yeah. But this one has a very distinctive score that's similar to Moonrise Kingdom and Grand Budapest. So it's going to be similar themes that we're going to be seeing, and on into French Dispatch, which I want to take a brief moment to talk about that, because we're probably about halfway through our schedule. I would assume we're a little bit more than half.
Yeah.
And this week, actually, the music video for Aline came out, which is the recognizable song that's played in the trailer.
I need to watch that, by the way. I still haven't watched that.
So that's directed by Wes Anderson, and that came out this past week. But I also just briefly wanted to talk about what your thoughts are about the trailer overall.
French Dispatch?
Yeah.
Man, it's been a while since I've seen it. I've kind of tried to lay off of it so that it's still fresh when I go watch it. I feel like it's his most provocative trailer so far. When I've seen other trailers, it's kind of straightforward. You're like, yep, this is a Wes Anderson film. This one has like a lot of those, like there's like explosions happening in slow motion and stuff, so you can still tell it's kind of the Wes Anderson style, but it's a little more I don't know, like it feels like a modern major motion picture, right?
Well, there is, I think, even talking about not just the revolutionary aspect to it of what's going on with the revolution and Timothy Chalamet and Frances McDormand's story, but there's also other stories where they're swimming out dead bodies out of a lake. And then there's the police chief and a boy getting kidnapped. So there is a lot going on.
Yeah.
What's interesting to me about it, I was going to ask, what are your expectations going into it? But since you talked briefly about, how it looks different from a Wes Anderson movie, or it looks like a major motion picture. One of the things that's confusing me as I watch the trailer is that it switches back and forth between black and white and color, and not in a way that designates time. So it's kind of hard to figure out what is this feature being used for? Why are we suddenly black and white here and suddenly color here with the same characters in the same time?
Yeah, that I don't know. That's new to him. I know Christopher Nolan did that really great in Memento, right?
And see, that would be used to explain that this is a different time.
And different directions in the storyline, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I guess we'll find out if Wes Anderson does something similar with the black and white versus color scenes. But yeah, I don't know. I guess I've kept my expectations are at a minimum for the film. Other than that, I'm pretty sure I'm going to like it. A, because it's Wes Anderson's, that already bodes well, but also it just looks like the kind of thing that I'm going to like more than like some of the other ones that I'm not quite as fond of, right?
Yeah, and I think this one will also be probably a little bit more political too.
Yeah, we talked
Grand
about that.
Budapest-
He's been trending that way, hasn't he?
Yeah, as he gets older, which is kind of true of, I think, most people. As you get older, politics becomes more of a focus in your mind. I mean, when I was 18, I just voted the way my church told me to vote. And now, I think about, and that was pretty unethical behavior by the church. But now I think about things and how I want certain people, what I want them to do and what role they'll play. But there's several little vignettes or several little things that just really are appealing to me in this movie, or in the trailer. And one is just these little scenes, Adrian Brody kind of screaming with his hat, when he's doing that. I don't know if it's because it's the backdrop of the song Eileen playing, which is just, I think, is a great song. But then there's also Saoirse Ronan kind of peering into the thing where it's all kind of latticed. Yeah, there's just so many little things that looks like, God, that looks like great cinematography and film, or direction.
Yeah.
And it just gets me so excited about it.
Also, those are great actors, like not only Adrian Brody, but Saoirse Ronan. Like, I know I watched Lady Bird again recently, and just like like what an awesome, like, not just film, but like her acting is like so refreshing and cool,
Yeah.
like I will say there was an era there for like a few years where like all these really fantastic films came out that starred girls or women or had almost all women or girl cast,
Mhm.
Bridesmaids was really hilarious and was one, and then there's another one about high school girls. I can't remember what it's called, but it's got the the chunkier girl from Lady Bird. She's the star in this other one. So like Lady Bird's best friend, that actress is in this other one I'm thinking of. I can't remember what it's called, but there were all these like really good things that came out for a while, and they were really fun and well made and well acted and all that kind of stuff. But I think Wes Anderson's done a great job with her being involved in this and in Grand Budapest.
Yeah. I my only I hesitate, or my only kind of, what's the word I can use? I'm wondering if the timelines are going to get confused, because you're following three different journalists as well as the overall story of the French Dispatch, which is, head up by Bill Murray and all those characters. So you have all those characters who are just a team of journalists. And then you have the individual stories where you're getting into the police police chief cook, the guy who's in prison who made the painting, and then the revolution with Francis McDormand. So I wonder if those stories are going to get lost. And then with the, like I said earlier, the transition between black and white and color, is it going to be a little off-putting, or is it going to be like we can't really find our bearings while we're watching it?
I think I don't know. I think you know too many details in advance.
I've watched the trailer several times. I absolutely love the trailer. So I've seen it a lot.
But you've done more than just watch the trailer, because you know all these bits about the storyline that aren't really revealed in the trailer,
I guess I did watch recently. I watched Wes Anderson do kind of like a little, what are those things called, where some of the directors as well as the cast talk about the film for 3 minutes.
Yeah. I just think I'm gonna like it, so I'm not worried about investigating or researching in advance. I'm just gonna hopefully go in and experience a really fun time at the theater watching it.
Okay.
We'll see though. I don't know. But okay, so we're kind of getting ahead of ourselves here, because today we're talking about Fantastic Mr. Fox, right?
Mm-hmm.
So based on the Roald Dahl book, which we have a copy of, but I don't think we've read it to the kids yet. Chelsea wanted to read it to the kids before we watched the movie, but
where does
didn't
the
get
book
around.
start in the storyline?
What's that?
Where does the book start in the storyline?
I don't know. I haven't read the book in so long, I can't tell you like hardly anything about it.
Why are we talking, Seth? If we can't, like, what are we going to talk about?
Yeah,
the movie was good.
Well, the movie is okay. I can't tell you about the book, but I can tell you. So the movie was fun. This is actually the second time I watched it with the kids, and it's stop motion, like you said. So this predates Isle of Dogs. So this is his first foray into stop motion, which, as I said in our episode about Isle of Dogs, I really like that format. And I think there's value in that. I think of the Tim Burton, stop motion stuff like Corpse Bride and Nightmare Before Christmas, which we're in fall now. So I've been listening to the Nightmare Before Christmas soundtrack nonstop.
I was going to say, I think this movie actually trumps Nightmare Before Christmas for me. And Corpse Bride and Coraline.
Yeah, Coraline too. Yeah, maybe. Part of the thing with Nightmare Before Christmas is the music. Danny Elfman's songs really put that kind of over the top.
But I don't know if you had this feeling when you watched the movie, and I don't know when you saw the movie last, but it kind of, so after you go over, what's this, like, that's like the best part of the movie to me. But after that, it kind of fizzles.
I've noticed that about Tim Burton movies in general. We watched Beetlejuice recently as a family, and it's so weird too, where like it builds like really well through like the first 30 to 45 minutes, and then it hits this peak, and then you're like, what's happening? This is not great.
It's so funny you say that, because I rented Batman Returns from the library, and the last 30 minutes I just fast forwarded through to see if anything was going on. But great build up, and great, actually, even for the 90s, great look at capitalism and how that affects society.
Yeah.
And then eventually you're just like, what's going on here? I mean, so yeah.
People say that about Stephen King novels, that he doesn't know how to end a story. And I wonder if that's the same with like Tim Burton and maybe just stop motion stuff in general. It just, it's hard to get it to wrap up in a good, satisfying fashion. I don't know.
And that's kind of the difference to me for Wes Anderson, is that he has an idea, but he follows through. So in all these movies we've seen, we may have said there may have been little things that we said about it, little areas where we thought it could have improved, or, whatever. But overall, you have an idea like this one, just looking at a Roald Dahl book and turning into motion picture. You have the idea, and he really fleshed it out.
Yeah.
So I was going to ask you about the book, but I did read that for the movie differs from the book in that you have all that backstory.
Yeah.
Anderson
Yeah.
gives you all the backstory of the characters.
And he gets into some really great, this would link to your studies in therapy and psychology and Buddhism, even, because there's all this existential stuff, where Mr. Fox asks, like, what is it to be a fox? Can a fox be happy without a chicken between its teeth? And you sort of ask about the very basic primal nature of what a fox is.
And that's one of the main themes I wanted to talk about in this. I don't know if we want to wait till later, but yeah, that shows up time and time again in the movie.
Yeah. Yeah, and I thought it was fascinating, not only from a character development standpoint of Mr. Fox, but also then later in the movie, he goes into all those Latin names of all the creatures.
Yeah.
And okay, and this all happens in a world where I've always felt odd about movies where animals are anthropomorphized, because if all of them are anthropomorphized, then you have meat-eating animals who are, it feels like they're committing murder, right? Because they're killing sentient creatures to eat them, as if, like, because everything's anthropomorphized, it'd be like us killing another human to eat them.
Yeah.
So I'm always like uncomfortable with that, especially in movies where, like, they're like friends, in the movie, and you're like, wait a second, but that one eats that one. They cannot be friends, because what happens when that eats his friend or him? Like, so.
But the chicken wasn't
Right, and
anthropomorphized.
that was a clever, like, thing there, where, like, all of the main characters are the predators, right? You have, like, a badger and an opossum and these foxes, and they're all predators, and their prey are not anthropomorphized. So I don't know if he did that intentionally, but if he did, that's pretty smart.
We could go into a deeper thing. I'm just going to say this briefly, but you mentioned psychology and therapy, but this actually can give you a pretty good clue into violence itself, because you have to dehumanize something before you can commit violence on it. So
Yeah.
that same thing happens in our lives too. We have to see them as less. I even think about it puts the lotion on its skin from Silence of the Lamb. That
Yeah.
language, it puts the lotion on its skin.
Yeah.
Made it easier to commit those horrific, acts. But yeah, in the movie, this is just seeing that we don't need to give the chickens personalities, because we're going to be eating the chickens.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there were just, like, some really fascinating things about the existential nature of what it means to be a fox, I guess, is what it is on the surface. But underneath, it's kind of like, what is it to be a sentient being and try to find happiness when you have this, and you and I talk about this all the time privately, you have these dual natures. You have what evolution gave you as far as survival instinct and all those biological parameters and prerogatives. Yet on the other hand, you are aware of all these things and wanting to sort of seek out happiness, and they conflict almost all the time.
Yeah. And so sentient being is mainly just that whatever. I always assume that sentient being mean anything that runs from pain and goes towards pleasure. There's some sentience there.
Yeah.
But for human beings, it's even crazier, because there's sentience of sentience. So it's
Yeah.
like there's awareness of the sentience.
Yeah.
And that's where things, speaking from an evolutionary perspective, I've heard people say that the universe is looking back on itself.
Mhm.
And we talked about that briefly too. I don't know how well that language would work for cosmologists, or, if they would use that language. But to be aware that you have this nature and that helped you survive, but also know that you have this other nature that helped you survive in the group. And so
Yeah.
you've got to balance these conflicting things of, we survived and we are at the level now that we're at. I mean, you go anywhere, almost anywhere, and we both live in cities. So I shouldn't say anywhere, but most of our lives, if you go out on the street, if you go anywhere, you're just seeing humans everywhere. So if you thought about that, if you just think about us being animals and thought about not just being animals, but that we are animals, it's part of us. But if you thought about that, and if you went somewhere and just saw, like, 300 buffalo hanging out somewhere, that'd be really shocking to you. But everywhere we go, there's just, even when I go to the park, I see the geese and I see the birds, but there's an overwhelming number of humans.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so we survived because, and we got to this number to where, I mean, even thinking about theology is that go and scatter your, what is it in Genesis with Abraham? God's blessing is to scatter your numbers.
Yeah. Be fruitful and multiply.
Be fruitful and multiply. Yeah, thank you. So we couldn't have survived unless we were working together. But at the same time, we have these reptilian and limbic brain protectors that want to look out just purely for ourselves.
Yeah.
And that's the ultimate, question of human existence is self and others.
And that's, I mean, go ahead.
Well, you see that with Fox, to where in his nature, this individualistic nature of I'm just going to go do this, but it has ramifications.
Yeah.
With his family and even with his community.
Yep.
The whole community is brought into all this. And they say that later when Boris Bunsen Bean, bombed the whole area, then everybody's forced into the sewers.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's almost like a stand-in for understanding the human condition.
Yeah, I think so.
Sometimes it works better to do it not as a human, but as something else, like a fox, where you are you're able to be given a more clear. And that's weird. It's who is it that says? Was it Stephen King or someone that said, like, you tell a lie intentionally so that you can tell the truth better, and that's the case with like these kind of stories where you intentionally have a distortion. Rather than try to explain the human condition with human characters, you use non-human characters, so it's a distortion, so that you can see human nature more clearly.
And yeah, that's really good.
So that's, it's great from like a way they made the film, but it's also fairly profound and explores some. Well, there's also, like, we could talk about family of origin dynamics as well, because there's that tension between his son and his nephew in terms of his acceptance, So, and then there's the marriage relationship that has tension there. So there's a lot of different relational dynamics at play in the film as well.
Yeah, but I had an idea. Can I go with an idea I wanted to talk about before we go into the family?
Yeah, go ahead.
Using those distortions that you're talking about, I was thinking about the fact that Fox has a phobia of wolves, but the whole movie culminates in him, kind of giving that signal to the wolf and recognizing the wildness in himself. And so it's interesting that he wants to be wild, but he has a phobia of wolves who, I mean, I don't know, I guess wolves eat fox. I don't know.
I don't know, perhaps, but my guess is that it's meant to be more existential, of like he's scared of his completely animal side.
Yeah, metaphorical. Yeah.
And that's kind of what the opossum says, the same thing, right?
What does the opossum say?
The possum says he's got a phobia of wolves as well, or something like that.
Oh, well, maybe it was just I thought the
They both say it. There's that great scene when they see the wolf and Fox is yelling at him, and he says, "I have a phobia of you," which I think is like a great statement. And it's really spiritual. That's a really powerful scene. Yeah. I almost got like goosebumps because the wolf is out there and is totally silent, and doesn't ever respond. And they realize something holy is happening there. And then he gives him the fist in the air, and the fox responds with his own fist in the air. And there's some really basic, like deep animal level camaraderie and recognition that we are the same.
Yeah, and I think, have you ever read Shel Strade's book Wild?
Mm-mm.
Can I grab that really quick and just read tell you the last of it?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah. If you can hear me while you're getting that, I will say that it was a fascinating. It's fun. I watched the movie with my two sons who are 6 and 10 last night, and that was their second time seeing it. But it is fun to watch a movie with the kids that they enjoy and you enjoy. Like, that's not ultra common, and that
Yeah,
was kind of
yeah.
delightful as well.
Those in Pixar movies are kind of, this one, and I think Pixar movies are usually the ones where it's catered to the both adult and the children. But it
And
is rare.
it's difficult to operate any kind of art on those multiple levels, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Cheryl Strayed wrote a book. Man, I am like, the light isn't doing.
I can see the word wild, but I couldn't see
Yeah.
anything else.
So this is a very popular book about going on doing a hike up the Pacific Crest Trail, and basically it's autobiographical, and she's writing about trying to put some things behind her, but the end of it, she has this spiritual moment, and I'll just say the last couple of sentences, but she says that she realizes. She says, to believe that I didn't need to reach with my bare hands anymore, to know that seeing the fish beneath the surface of the water was enough. That's something that's contextual that she mentions earlier. But she says that it was everything. It was my life, like all lives, mysterious and irrevocable and sacred. So very close, so very present, so very belonging to me. How wild it was to let it be. And I think not only is that a beautiful way to end the book, but it does speak to what we recognize with this wolf and the fox, is that accepting your nature, no longer fighting it, accepting. And then, I mean, once you can accept it, then you can make some better decisions about how you can allow see how you want to navigate your wildness. But you first have to accept your wildness.
Yeah.
And so for Fox, I think when he realized they had a cub on the way, he had to deny a lot of that. And then he became a newspaper writer. And so there was a lot of denial, a lot of pushing it away. And then it surfaces later when his kid becomes, I guess, a teenager, and that it comes back. And so I think this time around, it seems like after he's completed these stealing from all these farmers, maybe in some sense he's more aware of balancing it and not denying it and not pushing it away, but knowing that he is a wild creature and just letting it be.
Yeah. That's a good point. He it's like he exists in a kind of a natural unaware state in the beginning with his wife. And then once she announces she's pregnant and they get out of there and he promises not to steal chickens again, you're right. He's in denial and sort of, I mean, he's doing what he thinks is the right thing, but and he apparently does it fairly successfully for a while, but eventually he starts to come around to having those primal urges again. And so he starts to engage in those. And I do find it interesting. There's like a social dynamic here too, right? Where you could steal a little and kind of get away with it. But when you steal too much from the big wigs, then they get bent out of shape and they blow everything up in retaliation.
And that's kind of like, I mean, that's kind of psychology 101. If you suppress something, it's going to come back. And when it comes back, for Fox, it becomes this big endeavor. He can't stop stealing. And because that suppressed or repressed material came back so mighty, now it's created this condition, as you said, where the people who were stolen from responded back in an even stronger. So then it's just, evil begets evil there.
Yeah. So then, there's just the character is fascinating from that aspect, but his family of origin is a little fascinating as well, where, you empathize with his relationship with his wife, but I especially noticed, I kept paying attention with my kids there to all these things going on between him and his son, and him favoring his nephew, who's more athletic and taller.
Yeah.
And inviting him on the heist rather than his son, and the dynamic between them, and how the son feels left out and unwanted and unapproved of. So there's a lot of layers of relational sort of family of origin dynamic there that were interesting, especially when they play what do they call it? Whack ball.
Whatever the hell that game was.
Wasn't it great? I actually paused and I was like, Chelsea, come in here. Is this what baseball sounds like when I explain it to you? And I played, when Owen Wilson does the coach, and he's like hurriedly explains this insanely complex set of rules.
Yeah.
And she's like, yep, that's what baseball sounds like when you try to explain it to me. So
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting fact is that Wes Anderson's brother voiced Christopherson. So like,
oh, Eric Anderson.
yeah.
I was wondering that because it was a weird voice, and I was like, I don't, you recognize George Clooney, and Bill Murray and Jason Schwartzman and all these other ones, but then I kept thinking like, who the heck is Christopherson? I looked at I didn't even put it together. You mentioned his name before, but I just didn't put it together in my mind. That's his brother. I just saw Eric Anderson. I'm like, who the heck is Eric Anderson?
The other thing is that Meryl Streep didn't sound like Meryl Streep to me. It's kind of hard to tell that character is Meryl Streep.
Yeah. Yeah, she went through a phase where she did some pretty cool indie, or not top line movies.
Yeah.
But I don't know if it won her any like favors among the indie crowd or not. Maybe. I don't know.
There's also the fact that every time a cuss word would be used, they just say cuss.
Yeah, which is genius, right?
It is.
I thought that was great. Like that way you get the point across, but you make it still acceptable for kids to watch.
You cussing me?
Yeah. The cuss I am, like it's,
Yeah.
and the adults know exactly what they're trying to say, but like that makes so much sense. I always thought it's better than like various shows would try to do this on a different level and be creative about it. So like Battlestar Galactica and Firefly would do this where they would use, so like I think Battlestar Galactica was like goram instead of goddamn, and fracking instead of fucking, but like it never, it's always a little like cheesy, to have that kind of stuff. Whereas saying cuss in place of any profane word is like pretty clever.
Yeah, it's so just talking about clever in the writing, but Wes Anderson and Noah Baumbach wrote this, which is the last movie they did together was Life Aquatic. So that is a credit to both of them, that using that thing makes sense to both children and adults and works well in a way that doesn't diminish the overall meaning of what the word is supposed to represent.
Yeah. And when they start doing that, one of the first scenes that's prominent is when he's in there with Badger talking about buying the house. So Bill Murray and George Clooney's voices as Badger and Fox, they're doing it. And they go back and forth. And then it's fascinating too, all the ways in which their animal natures like come out. Like it's like they come out of the skin of these like refined characters. They've got this suit and tie on, and they're in this nice posh office. And then they start arguing like, and they circle the desk. And then they like calm down again and sit down and have a civilized discussion. And they do the same every time they eat. Fox gets down to eat. He's like, that was really, it was fascinating to me, but I think it was actually a little disturbing to my 6-year-old who like, it sounds and looks really violent, what's happening on the screen.
Yeah.
So,
and I mean, that's an interesting thing, thinking about how a 6-year-old would perceive that. I've been working in therapy a lot of how to own. So we talked about the wildness, and a theme that's come up for me is how do I own my rage? How do I own my anger? How do I own this violence? Instead of, which I'm not a violent person and I've never attacked anyone, but instead of projecting that onto something else and making them the evil person that I can then project all these things onto, how do I own these things? And Fantastic Mr. Fox kind of asked that question too. How do we own these things that are so contrary to our civilization? And then how does it show up when we don't own these things? Does it show up as getting very violent when a colleague or a friend of yours, or I assume a friend, but someone who's trying to give you a wise decision about whether or not you should buy this house because you don't have the money to buy it, and then suddenly that creates, what was the real underlying things there? Was it just that situation, or was it built up anger that hadn't been appropriately contained, felt, and again, to use that word, of really owning that this is mine. And you, of course, it's natural to blame people in your head for things, and that kind of comes up. And there are certain people that are responsible for the violence, but instead of just finding someone who, I remember John Lennon saying of the Beatles, like, you're together so long that when someone plays the tambourine, you're like yelling at them. My whole life is a wreck because you messed up that tambourine. And that's a perfect example of like how we do that. Everything else that's going on in our life is projected onto the person playing the tambourine instead of just owning that messiness.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a fascinating, I guess, aspect of how Fox being unaware of that messiness and that wildness is probably what leads to him buying the nicer house in the first place, right? So in the storyline, he's like in his natural state. Then his wife says, "You got to stop, stealing these foxes because we got a kid on the way." So he takes his job as the newspaper guy, and you can tell it's not really fulfilling, and it's sort of just getting by. And he feels poor. They're living underground in this hole. And so he buys this house, and it's almost like it's a replacement for the wildness, right? It's like, well, if I can't be wild, I should at least live extravagantly. And I kind of feel like that's usually what it is. It's sort of compensation, right?
Yeah, and it's also just not accepting yourself either. So like that feeling of poor, I can't accept this. So I need to do something else. And I mean, this happens. This, governs our whole economy. We buy stuff to make we could go into a rabbit hole with this. But this sense of unworthiness, or that we're not worthy, or that we're incomplete, or any of those things drive all this external behavior, from violence to consumerism.
Yeah. And that's another thing that, like, it's one of those things. Anytime you have a story like this, you can't pull the thread too hard, or else you ask questions that can't be answered. So when they're talking about buying the house, and they talk about, like, he's talking about borrowing at a certain rate, and then you're like, do they have banking set up among these animals? Are they charging interest rates just like we do? That'd be really weird, right? Like, and then you're asking, like, what kind of monetary system do animals use?
But in the same theme, you can't beat the audience. You can't beat the head end of the audience of these major themes.
Right.
You got to lead them to what we're doing now, which is talking about it afterwards. So, you don't want to give too much in the way of, as you're talking about, is what is the economic system of these animals, but also you don't want to give too much about what are the themes we're trying to represent here. And that's why, again, just the wolf doesn't say anything. There's just this moment of that. And that's enough for us to have an hour-long conversation about how these themes show up in our own lives.
I just think, to take a short children's book and make something that good out of it is pretty impressive. And it's not always done. I think of, like, Where the Wild Things Are, which was not a terrible movie, but it didn't really
connect much.
Yeah, right. It just misses some things, and is not successful on the way that this is, in turning a short children's book into a long form feature-length movie.
Yeah, I watched that recently, and I think the thing, first of all, you do feel like you're kind of hit over the head with the themes a little bit, but also it just seems like they stay a little bit too long. So the book, I don't know if you've read that one, To Adlai or Elijah, but the book is just very short. Yeah, and then he comes back for the dinner. But the majority of that film is taking place on this place where the wild things are. And I get it. Each of these monsters represents a monster within the child, but it just seems like, they're just hitting you over the head with it. And this is really a credit to, I think when people talk about Wes Anderson, they talk about, his quirkiness. They talk about having the shot in the frame and how that's kind of, centered and all that. And they talk about these things, but really, I don't think what's talked about enough is just how accomplished he is. Just how great of a storyteller he is, even from the little thing of using that in the form of, actual cuss words, to not beating your audience over the head with certain themes. So he's a great writer. He knows how to find, and every image is purposeful, and that's true, because obviously when you're making a movie, it probably takes, days just to set up one scene. So everything is purposeful, and he does it in a way that is just masterful.
And it is, I will say, it's a subjective thing when you talk about, beating someone over the head with a thing, or being a little more subtle or nuanced about it. I think Wes Anderson is at the level that makes a lot of sense to you and I, and a lot of people like us. But there's a lot of people that Wes Anderson doesn't appeal to. I think it has, at least in some part, and maybe large part, and due to the fact that they don't pick up on those things. They're not stated quite obviously enough. And of course, there are directors and writers who are way further on that scale, on that spectrum than Wes Anderson, who are very nuanced, and sometimes it's so obscure I can't pick it up. So I think about that when you watch really artistic films, like maybe even David Lynch or someone, and people are like, "Oh, it's a statement about this and that," and I'm thinking like, I think I'm kind of intelligent and well educated, and I didn't pick up on that at all. And if I did anyone, like, what are you part of, like 1.0 or 0.0001% of the population who actually would understand what the heck he's getting at here,
Yeah, I mean, that's true, is that these kind of directors are speaking to a very particular audience, and that particular audience is very limited.
Yeah.
Even Ingmar, I think about Ingmar Bergman, who I absolutely love, but I can't think of one person who would sit with me and watch an Ingmar Bergman movie. Okay, so Seth, maybe we can do intentionally Ingmar Bergman later, but that, and then there's another filmmaker that's Krzysztof Kieslowski. Have you ever heard of what's his movie about the Ten Commandments?
Decalogue.
So even that, have you ever seen that?
You told me to watch it actually a couple years ago when I had some time at and I did. I think I started it, but wasn't able to finish it from time before I had to return because it's all those different things, So, but it was pretty fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, stuff like that. Who, again, I truly think of Bergman as just above all the rest, and then Kieslowski I think is great too. And then I'm not a fan of this director, but I know that he holds a lot of appeal, like someone like David Lynch, which is, I've forgotten his name, but the guy who did 2001: A Space Odyssey.
Stanley Kubrick.
So Stanley Kubrick is kind of known. I love the movie Doctor Strangelove, but everything else I've seen, aside from that film, and 2001 is pretty interesting. But these are filmmakers who are kind of, I don't know who are considered gods among small amounts of people.
You're right.
And then, actually, I want to talk to you about this personally, but I'm going to bring it into here. But Scorsese, I mean, I wonder how Scorsese is viewed.
I mean, he seems to have a pretty good reputation and be really well respected, right?
Yeah, and I think he has a lot of clout as far as movie like production. People are going to pay for a Scorsese film because they know they're going to show up to it. So I think he has a lot of clout, and
but he doesn't. So, but he okay. So we're talking about sort of who, what portion of the population resonates with a movie or a story. And I think we're past the point of mass media where a movie can resonate with almost 100% of the population. But there are, even though things are limited, there are some things that resonate with larger amounts than others. So you think of something like the Avengers series seems to resonate with like an awfully large percentage of at least the American, if not the Western population, right, of the world.
Hey, really quick, do you have a pause? Do you have a pause button on your record?
Oh, okay. Hold on. Well, yeah, I do have pause. You want me to pause it?
Dude, hit pause. I've got the pee so bad.
Okay. All right. We'll pause. Okay, we're back from the bathroom break.
Yeah, back from the bathroom break. You were talking about Avengers and movies that have success across the board.
And you were going to say something.
No, I was just going to say I need to go use the bathroom. I was saying I'm going to roll it in so you can continue what you were saying.
Okay. Something like the Avengers movies have like this widespread appeal, but then like Martin Scorsese does, and Wes Anderson's probably in a similar vein where they have a large enough scale that they are well respected from actors and studios and stuff, and they do their movies make money, etc. And they're successful in the theaters and on DVD, but it still is like it's definitely not a majority of the population that is familiar with these movies, right?
I mean, I was thinking specifically about Scorsese and Irishman. I remember a lot of people talking about that. I mean, even people that didn't talk about movies were talking about that one.
Yeah, I mean, maybe online and in like urban circles, but I mean, I guarantee, like, I interact with people at church all the time, or just in, if you go out into the country, like, it's like, if it's not John Wayne or Clint Eastwood or the Avengers or something like that, they don't know. I mean, they might have watched the most recent John Cena movie, but they are not going to know anything about who Wes Anderson is or who Martin Scorsese is. So
So if I go out to Kansas, I'm going to have a hard time talking about the themes of Silence by Martin Scorsese.
yeah, well, not even just Kansas in general, but outside of like the cities like Kansas City and stuff.
Yeah. By
That's
the way, sorry,
good.
this is a brief aside, but I have not watched a single Scorsese movie I've enjoyed.
Really?
That was brought on by watching the movie Age of Innocence just last week, and that made me think of everyone that I've watched. I thought they were good, and I thought they were well made, but I have not enjoyed them.
Yeah, actually, I would probably agree with that. Like, I can't say they're bad movies.
No.
I just didn't care for them.
Yeah.
So, okay, cool. That actually makes me feel a little better that I'm not like some Neanderthals, like, oh, get it.
But I think a lot of people do feel that. I mean, Age of Innocence had Daniel Day-Lewis in it, and great acting, and Michelle Pfeiffer. But I just felt like I got lost in it, and or that it didn't reach its full potential. That's what I think about most of Martin Scorsese, is that movies like Silence, and I've read that book. That's a great book by Shusaku Endo. If you ever want to read about, or if you ever want to question Christian. The word just escaped me. What is it where you go to other countries and
like missionaries?
Missionaries. If you ever want to question Christian missionaries, read Shusaku Endo's Silence. But Martin Scorsese had been trying to make the film for several years and finally got it going, and it just didn't live up.
Huh. Okay. Did he do Boondock Saints or Reservoir Dogs? He did one of those, right?
He didn't do Reservoir Dogs. I don't know about Boondock Saints.
I watched The Departed. That was okay, and people went nuts about it, but I was like, it's not that great. It's just, I don't know.
Yeah, it's the Nirvana of movies.
It's the Nirvana of movies. Oh, I hope Gen Xers aren't around, because they'll get up in arms about that one. Dude, every time I'm around someone in their 40s or 50s, it's like they are like, Jesus Christ, you cannot say bad things about Kurt Cobain or Nirvana. Like, it is so weird, man. And I'm just like, it's not that good. I mean, okay, it's not terrible, but it's not that good. And you guys act like this is like the holy grail of music. I don't get it at all.
Yeah. I mean, I understand it historically. Maybe we had to be around at a time where garage, what is it? At grunge, where grunge wasn't like a big thing. So I think about that with the Beatles when I listen to them, because you and I obviously love the Beatles, and almost everything I do musically can be pointed to some theme somewhere in the Beatles. So, I mean, I look at them as being masters of that. But I wonder what it would be like to listen to Sgt. Pepper when it first came out. And I wonder what it would be like to listen to the White Album when it first came out. Something like, what's the movie, or what's the song there that I was thinking about? Something like Rocky Raccoon or Piggy, or these songs like they have Baroque and this kind of mix of things.
I gotta tell you, this is a totally different genre, but I would imagine it sounds like I remember distinctly the first time I heard, and what a weird feeling it was when I first heard that System of a Down song, Chop Suey. When it came, I was with a friend driving from his house to like some church event or something. We got in his car, turned on the local radio station that played that kind of music. I'd never heard the song before, and that came on. I remember being like, dude, what the heck is this? It's so cool. I remember like I was so blown away and I loved it, but I was just like, I've never heard anything like this. What the heck is going on in this song, That has to be what it was like to hear like some of those Beatles songs the first time.
I guess so, and maybe grunge too. We're getting on a separate subject, but I do want to say really quickly that I can't think of a time where that's happened for me. And I mean, I remember the first time I heard certain elements being used in pop songs, like putting a high pass filter too high, or doing that kind of, what's the one where it's or something like that, those kind of synth elements that where it's all sliced up and so I've heard new things, but it was always like, well, this isn't appealing to me. I can't
Yeah.
remember a time where I heard a revolutionary new song, like a whole thing that I was like, this is coming. So I can't
What
think of a time.
do you remember, like, by any chance, like, one thing that stands out to me that it could be a possibility is like, do you remember when you heard like the first Mumford and Sons song come out or anything like that? Because that was pretty different than what was on the radio at the time, and it made a lot of people like, what the heck is this? I mean, there was no other song in rotation that sounded even vaguely like that on the radio.
That's a good point. And actually, now that I think about it, hearing the song Kiss Me by Sixpence None the Reacher.
I remember that, but that feels like a fairly generic 90s song.
I know, I'm just kidding.
Okay.
Maybe the first time I heard Jeff Buckley, I would have been like, oh, what is this? It's like he's singing a Benjamin Britten song at the same time he's singing like some kind of hard rock grunge kind of weird Indian, this mesh of several different things coming together. And then singing Leonard Cohen's Hallelujah all on the same album.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
I mean, this is my subjective take, but I wouldn't guess grunge is like that because it feels like grunge bands are fairly homogenous. In fact, my wife and I were talking about Bond themes recently, and we were remembering who wrote. I remember Jack White did the one. He did the one, actually the worst Daniel Craig James Bond film, Quantum of Solace. But I said, yeah, the other one was. I remember, Adele did Skyfall, and I was like, yeah, Spectre or no, Casino Royale was that guy. It's someone like Eddie Vedder, and so she looks it up and she's like, oh, you were right. It's who's the other guy from the other grunge band? Chris Cornell. She's like, it's Chris Cornell. You're right. It is someone like Eddie Vedder. Honestly, I can't tell them apart. I cannot tell you the difference. I don't even know which one is the one for Stone Temple Pilots and which is the one for Pearl Jam. And they sound the same. Again, I'm not into grunge, so I admit that. But like, I'm a musician. I studied music. Like, I kind of know what's going on. And if I can't distinguish them pretty easily, then it feels like it's pretty homogenous, right?
yeah, and I'm going to gloss over a lot here, but I think that Elliott Smith and Jeff Buckley was really the only thing good that came out of the 90s musically. I mean, I'm glossing over a lot.
Normally, I would agree with you because I normally do not defend the 90s. But so the producer we're working with on our new album is super into the 90s. And
hey, you can't promote here.
No, I'm not going to promote that. But it's just because I had this conversation recently and he was like, I was telling him I don't like grunge. And he's like, okay, I get that. But the 90s had a lot of other stuff. And I was like, so I started by saying, okay, I kind of like Weezer, I kind of like Red Hot Chili Peppers, but I think those are like the only things from the 90s I really like. And then he started naming these things, and then we got on this tangent, and I started realizing, like, oh my gosh, like Weird Al's in the 90s. That's great stuff. Cake is in the 90s. That's pretty good stuff. We started going through like all of these artists, and I was like, okay, I guess I can say I don't like the 90s in general, but there are a lot of caveats to that. There's a lot of other bands that were like these weird indie / alt rock bands that are actually pretty awesome from the 90s.
Yeah, and Cake is good. We're getting way off topic here. Cake is good, but there's no way I put them on the same level as Elliott Smith or Jeff Buckley, just personally.
Yeah. I would put Cake above Jeff Buckley personally, but that's just a
wow. What was it you said a long time ago? Your opinion is wrong.
And I get in these conversations all the time. I used to have a coworker who like was annoyed by how much I liked Ben Folds, and I was
Ben Folds 5 came out of the 90s.
That's another one. Ben Folds 5 is a 90s band, and they're great. Yeah, I was listening to Ben Folds, and he was like, he knew I liked the Clash, and he's like, so would you say Ben Folds is better than the Clash? And he meant it to be like, of course not. And I was like, I mean, I do like the Clash, but I think I do like Ben Folds more. And he was like, I'm not talking to you anymore today. Like, you're unreasonable.
You are being ridiculous right now, and I'm going to walk away for a while.
Yeah.
So let's talk really quick because we're probably pretty much at our time here, but it's Fantastic Fox, Mr. Fox, Essential Wes Anderson. If you had a box set, would you include this movie in that?
Well, as I said before, it really depends on the parameters of the box set, like how many movies are we including, and that kind of stuff. But I do think if you're making a box set of Essential Wes Anderson, you should have one of the stop motion animation films in it because he's done 2 of them now, and I think they're both decent. So you should include at least one of them. And I know you don't like Isle of Dogs, so I would imagine you would have to put it in your essential Wes Anderson. Um, I think it's good, but I don't think it's amazing. Oh, we should do rankings and ratings next.
I actually need to get. So keep talking to yourself.
Yeah,
I'm gonna go
I'm
get
good
my
at
pad.
that. I'll talk to myself while you grab your pad, your notepad. So we've been keeping track of our ratings and rankings on all these Wes Anderson films, and I haven't given a lot of thought to this, but I could say pretty easily, Fantastic Mr. Fox is above a 7, but I know it's not a 10. So I'm going to be somewhere between 7.5 and 9, probably closer to like a 7.5 or 8 for
Wow.
this.
So which one, 7.5 or 8?
I think I'd have to probably go 8.
So this one I think is really good and would be in my essential. And just for the themes that we've talked about, that really resonate with me over Isle of Dogs. So Isle of Dogs, you have those themes of abandonment and all that, and that I don't know if that resonates with me as much as the theme of how do we live in a civilized society with these, other kind
Animal
of
impulses. Yeah.
I mean, that's kind of Freudian, but yeah.
Yeah.
So that really resonates with me, and I would give this one. I think this is I would say 9.2. That's the number that's coming to my mind, but I'm going to say a 9.
Yeah, I think you should say 9.
So for this one, oddly enough, we have Bottle Rocket. If I'm looking at just the critic scores, we have Bottle Rocket at 85, Rushmore at 90, Royal Tenenbaums at 81, Life Aquatic at 56, Darjeeling Limited at 69, and Fantastic Mr. Fox at 93. So the highest so far.
Really?
Yep.
Okay, so I think there's a little bit of personal prejudice playing in there where I bet a lot of those reviewers had read the Roald Dahl book growing up, and to see a satisfactory feature-length film made out of it was probably very, kind of satisfying and fulfilling for them. And that's part of what is at play. I'm not saying it's bad, of course, because I gave it an 8 out of 10, but I think that's got to play into it, right?
It could be, yeah.
So I'm assuming that based on that, you definitely would put it in your essential Wes Anderson.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah. So far, mine is Royal Tenenbaums, Rushmore, and Fantastic Mr. Fox. That's my box set.
So far, like not counting the movies we haven't seen yet. I would definitely put it in over Rushmore, but yeah, as far as rankings overall, this is still, I know it's 8 out of 10, but it's kind of near the middle for me. It's not in the top 3, maybe 4, but it's not in the bottom 3 or 4 either. It's in that middle third, maybe the top of that middle third, but it's still the middle third, I think, which is pretty good to say you've got a movie from your category in the middle third of someone's rankings that's an 8 out of 10. Does that make sense?
I was going to say, it sounds like you're trying to explain baseball to Chelsea. Well, it's the third, but middle third. And then the third and then somewhere in the middle of that third is where we're going to go in and yeah.
Yeah. Go back and watch that scene. Owen Wilson's voice is so good for that conversation too. Yeah, you should go back and watch that scene because that's a great scene. And just watch the animations of all the characters running around like crazy during the illustration.
And somehow Christopherson picks it up perfectly.
I know. But doesn't that also resonate to like teen experience where it seems like there's that one person in your group that like always is a natural fit for everything. You're so envious of them because it's like, oh, they just naturally fit into this situation, even though they've never encountered it before. Isn't that convenient, Yeah.
I think you and I could probably relate. You were homeschooled, so I think you came into high school at 9th grade. Is that right?
Yeah.
So we can probably relate a little more with Jason Schwartzman's character than Chris Christopherson. A little. Yeah.
Yeah. Different. You're sort of always like, look at me. Like I'm okay. I can do stuff, but no one wants to give you any attention. So you're just like, fine. Yeah. I did like that. They're always doing this. He's special.
All right. I think that's it. And then we'll get back together and talk about coming up next, Moonrise Kingdom, which I know
is that next for us.
Well, let me pull out the schedule from Seth's text that I apparently have not paid enough attention to.
I'm pretty sure you're right. Because then the Moonrise Kingdom shorts are after that, right?
Okay. Yeah.
That is actually exciting because you and I both really love that, and I got to imagine that that's going to be like, yeah, you said we're about halfway or a little more. We're actually like 2/3 of the way. We're like, because we only have 3 more of these.
Yeah, that's why I wish we would have brought in French Dispatch earlier, because that's the goal we're going towards. So it would have been good to talk about that in
So yeah, so we have 3 more. So we're entering the month that French Dispatch comes out. We'll do Moonrise Kingdom next week, then the Moonrise Kingdom shorts that are sort of associated with it the week after that, and then Grand Budapest, and then we'll watch the new feature-length film.
Yeah. Is this far enough away to where the light isn't? Is this good?
Your torso looks oddly proportioned at that distance. So maybe it's the way you were sitting in your posture.
Am I getting bleached out now? All right, man.
All right, so let's do our.
Also, I want to talk to you after this, so stay on.
Okay.
I'm Brandon Michael Williams.
And I'm Seth Andrews Hecox.
And together we're
Intentionally Wes Anderson.
Anderson.
All right, see you, man.
Yeah.